Regular COVID-19 press conference today, July 2nd. My name is Tariq Sharevic and I will be helping with moderating the question and answer session. Today we will have a special focus on the results of Small Iceland Developing States Summit for Health that took place earlier this week. Dr. Tedros will introduce our very special guest today in a minute. I will just ask journalists to be brief in their question and ask only one question in any of 6 UN languages and Portuguese. And our interpreters will help with that. I will now give the floor to Dr. Tedros. We have a number of WHO experts here in a room. I will just mention some. Some of them are online, some of them are coming. As usual, we have Dr. Maria Van Kerkhove, technical lead. Our chief scientist, Dr. Sumya Swaminathan, is also with us. Mariangela Simao, Assistant Director General, Access to Medicines and Health Products. We have Anne Lindström on phone, and she is unit head for essential routine on immunization. We also have Dr. Nedret Emiroglu, who is a director here in the role of independent panel. We have also some other people who may also be asked to help us with answering questions. With this, I give the floor to Dr. Tedros for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Tariq. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This week, WHO hosted a 2-day summit with heads of state, heads of government, ministers, and civil society leaders from small island developing states, SIDS, which focused on building resilient health systems in the face of multiple threats. Climate crisis, the severe impact of the pandemic on lives and livelihoods, vaccine inequity, and the large burden of non-communicable diseases were discussed and concrete outcomes developed on how together we can tackle them. His Excellency, Gaston Brown, Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, addressed the summit, and I'm pleased and honored he has joined us again today to give his perspectives on the urgent issues at hand. Your Excellency, Prime Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tedros, Director General, members of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I welcome this opportunity to brief the members of the press on the SID Summit outcome statement. First of all, let me thank everyone who participated in the first ever WHO SID Summit and for their contribution to the development of this excellent and pragmatic outcome, which calls for a healthy and resilient future. Antigua and Barbuda, as the chair of the Alliance of Small Island States, takes this opportunity to fully endorse the summit's outcome statement. The outcome statement captures the vulnerabilities of small island developing states, which are susceptible to the threats of economic shocks, climate change, and the burden of non-communicable diseases, which have undermined the health and well-being of our citizens and residents. While mindful of our vulnerabilities and limited capacity, the SIDS have been confronting the challenges with its limited resources, but our inadequate resources are now further strained by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. SIDS vulnerabilities have worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic to the extent that achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and the aspirations of the Samoa Pathway will require a multi-dimensional approach, including the support of the international community. The Sustainable Development Goals' overarching principle is to leave no one behind, and SIDS are determined to achieve that goal. This all requires greater global collaboration and cooperation of the international community to develop more refined and bespoke development pathways for SIDS to effectively confront the challenges they are faced with. The health and well-being of SIDS must be seen as a global human right, justifiable on moral grounds and our common humanity. This should be universally acceptable within the UN system and other development partners. Now, this outcome statement requires action by all and hinges on urgent intervention in addressing the unique vulnerability of SIDS and the inequalities that stand as obstacles to their development. It also firmly establishes health at the heart of climate action and the need to develop climate resilient health systems. However, health and economic resilience cannot be achieved by SIDS without the assistance of the international community. Hence, new inclusive funding mechanisms for sustainable financing should be developed to include debt for climate swaps and obligatory compensatory financial instruments for loss and damage as a result of damage from climate change disasters, and certainly funding for adaptation and mitigation. Eligibility for financing should be inclusive and based on vulnerability. To this end, the outcome statement reiterates the call for the development of a multi-dimensional vulnerability index to replace the flawed per capita income criterion. The outcome document also calls for ambitious measures to combat climate change and to protect the natural environment. However, I wish to add that profligate users of fossil fuels who have contributed to global warming and pollution, whose adverse climate actions have resulted in loss and damages in SIDS, should be legally obligated to make financial reparations for the damages, not for us as SIDS, vulnerable SIDS, to wait for handouts and promises, unfulfilled promises from these states. Now, this compensation should include debt write-offs for SIDS that have had to borrow repeatedly to rebuild from climate damage, resulting in unsustainable debt burdens. The outcome document addresses the burdens of malnutrition and undernutrition, necessitating interventions to ensure food security and adequate nutrition. It recommends pooled procurement among SIDS, especially for medicines and medical supplies to reduce costs. In fact, pooled procurement has been successfully practiced in the OECS Caribbean sub-region for decades. It also acknowledges the need to acquire new technologies, including access to digital technologies and the need for access to good quality education and lifelong learning. While we all can agree that we are small, our dreams and goals extend beyond our borders. SIDS have led many global initiatives that oftentimes serve as the anchor to many international agreements. We placed entities on the global stage. We led the charge for 1.5 to stay alive, as climate change disproportionately affects SIDS more than any other. Developmental challenges like pandemics and diseases, climate change and disasters, economic instability, and a lack of global economic opportunities, they compound the vulnerability of SIDS and inhibit our overall development. Despite these challenges, our countries are innovators, and we have had successes in many areas. Antigua and Barbuda and other SIDS were among the first to have eliminated mother-to-child transmission of HIV. Right here in the Caribbean, we have Cuba as a small state that continues as a leader in healthcare and medicines. And many other SIDS are promoting the concept of universal healthcare with significant success, despite their fiscal constraints. While we can list a few accomplishments, the world sometimes turns its back on us. And this is happening perhaps a little too often. And COVID-19, the pandemic, is a typical example as to how the international community has failed to assist SIDS in meaningful ways in order to deal with this global pandemic. Now, despite the good efforts of the COVAX facility, developed partners are not doing enough. With the economic onslaught of the pandemic, SIDS have limited access to vaccines. We still have a problem globally of vaccine nationalization. And that's compounded by the fact that travel and trade have been curtailed, thereby inflicting great wounds on our economies. So we now run the risk of disintegrating into what I consider to be economic sclerosis, eroding decades of hard-won gains. And that should not be allowed to happen. Our tourism industry is all but at a standstill. Our economies are shattered. And there's much anxiety among SIDS of the possibility of a protracted pandemic, which means that we all have to move in lockstep with each other in global solidarity in order to effectively defeat this pandemic. Now, it is therefore our hope that the WHO can begin the process of the pandemic and global health toolkit that is tailored to this. To achieve the objectives of this outcome statement, we must all commit to take bold action, recognizing the interconnectedness of the human health of SIDS and sustainable development. This requires tackling the social determinants of healthy SIDS while promoting economic resilience for our countries. I close by thanking Dr. Tedros for his exemplary global leadership during this most challenging period. And I certainly thank him for his commitment and advocacy on behalf of SIDS. Finally, we welcome the recommendation for the establishment of a SIDS Leaders Group on Health for high-level advocacy. And I take this opportunity to charge everyone to use this summit outcome statement as a rallying call in addressing the health challenges of SIDS. I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister. Thank you for your leadership. And I couldn't agree more with you about the importance of looking at the multidimensional threats and working together to solve them. On an almost day-to-day basis, we are now seeing the impact of the climate crisis. Record-breaking, scorching heat waves, catastrophic storms, and changing weather patterns are impacting food systems, disease dispersion, and societies at large. The time for lofty words is over. There needs to be concerted action backed by financial resources to mitigate the consequences of climate change while we work to keep temperatures down and scale green innovations. In terms of the small islands, their very existence is at risk. As the Prime Minister noted, the same is true for vaccine equity in many respects. Many small island developing states have succeeded in preventing widespread transmission of COVID-19 in their communities. But the pandemic has hit you hard in other ways, such as declining revenues from tourism, which is affecting your economy significantly, compounded by more transmissible variants like Delta, which is quickly becoming the dominant strain in many countries. We're in a very dangerous period of this pandemic. In those countries with low vaccination coverage, terrible scenes of hospitals overflowing are again becoming the norm. But no country on earth is out of the woods yet. The Delta variant is dangerous and is continuing to evolve and mutate, which requires constant evaluation and careful adjustment of the public health response. Delta has been detected in at least 98 countries and is spreading quickly in countries with low and high vaccination coverage. There are essentially two ways for countries to push back against new surges: public health and social measures like strong surveillance, strategic testing, early case detection, isolation, and clinical care remain critical, as well as masking, physical distance, avoiding crowded places, and keeping indoor areas well ventilated are the basis for the response. And second, the world must equitably share protective gear, oxygen, tests, treatments, and vaccines. I have urged leaders across the world to work together to ensure that by this time next year, 70% of all people in every country are vaccinated. This is the best way to slow the pandemic, save lives, drive a truly global economic recovery, and along the way, prevent further dangerous variants from getting the upper hand. By the end of this September, we're calling on leaders to vaccinate at least 10% of people in all countries. This would protect health workers and those at most risk, effectively ending the acute stage of the pandemic and saving a lot of lives. It's a challenge, but we know it's possible because already 3 billion vaccines have been distributed. It is within the collective power of a few countries to step up and ensure that vaccines are shared, manufacturing is increased, and that the funds are in place to purchase the tools needed. There is now some sharing of vaccines happening, but it's still only a trickle, which is being outpaced by variants. In those countries whose hospitals are filling up, they need vaccines and other health tools right now. New manufacturing hubs, including for mRNA vaccines, are being developed, but this could be accelerated by companies openly sharing technology and know-how. In particular, I urge those companies like BioNTech, Pfizer, and Moderna to share their know-how so that we can speed up the development of new production. The sooner we start building more vaccine hubs and upping global vaccine capacity, the sooner we can diminish deadly surges. This week, the leaders of IMF, World Bank, WTO, and WHO met to look at practical ways to track, coordinate, and advance the delivery of COVID-19 vaccines to low and middle-income countries. Collectively, we also made several asks to the G20 to accelerate global efforts to reach our vaccine targets. Finally, some countries, regions have launched so-called vaccine certificates, and I want to make it very clear that it's important that these do not lead to discrimination against those people and countries that have either a lack of vaccines or certain type of vaccine. As you know, WHO issues emergency use listings for vaccines based on a stringent assessment of safety and efficacy, and we expect all countries to recognize and accept those vaccines that WHO has approved. Again, I would like to thank His Excellency Prime Minister Brown for joining us today. And now I will pass back to Tariq. Tariq?
Thank you very much, Dr. Tedros. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Prime Minister Gaston Brown. I understand Prime Minister will stay with us for some minutes, so hopefully we will hear from him when we come to questions from journalists. And we already have some journalists raising their hand, so we will start immediately with Laurent Sierot of Swiss News. Laurent?
Yeah, thank you, Tariq, for taking my question. A recent study by the University of Oxford a few days ago shows that period up to 45 weeks between 2 doses of AstraZeneca might improve the efficiency of that vaccine. As you're facing shortages in the framework of COVAX, are you going to take that into consideration to adapt the dispatch of doses in the next months in the different countries? Thank you.
Thanks for that question. I can start, and maybe Joachim Hombach is online and can add details. Yes, indeed, we saw that report showing that, up to 10 months of a gap between the first and the second dose of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine still provided very good immunogenicity after the second dose and, had resulted in high levels of neutralizing antibodies. It is very reassuring, I think, for people and for countries where there may be a delay in obtaining the second dose. We know there are supply constraints, and many countries that received the first dose and have given the first dose to people do not have supplies for the second dose. COVAX is trying to address that. But in the meantime, it's reassuring that a longer gap beyond the 8 to 12 weeks that is currently recommended by WHO is not, we're not going to pay a penalty for that. People will still mount a good immune response. But having said that, we also know that 2 doses of the vaccine, in this case the ChAdOx vaccine, is what gives full protection against disease. And so we do want people to get that second dose within the recommended interval of time so that they're fully protected within that period. So it's a trade-off between increasing the coverage for larger numbers of people with the first dose and providing full coverage, full protection to people, which they get after the second dose. And particularly with the Delta variant, we do want that full protection. So as supplies increase, there should be no problems really in being able to give everyone their second dose in time. But studies like this help us to learn more about the immune response to vaccines and the immunology and also on the duration of protection that we get from vaccines. So it's very welcome. And we would like to see more studies like this on other vaccines that are being used around the world. Thank you. I can see if Hombach wants to add something.
Thank you very much, Dr. Semnet. And online we have with us Dr. Joachim Hombach, who is a secretary to the SAGE. So Joachim, could you please unmute yourself and add if you wish?
Yes, thanks very much. I don't have much to add, but really also to underline again, this is great news, which adds flexibility to a schedule if it cannot be met as recommended, if there's supply issues. But as already mentioned by Dr. Swaminathan, it is nevertheless important to underline this is a 2-dose vaccine, and we know the 2 doses are needed to confer optimal protection, in particular against variants of concern. And so this is, I think, an important reminder. But otherwise, this is great news indeed. Over.
Many thanks, Dr. Hombach, Secretary to the SAGE. We will go to our next question. It's Michael Busirkiv, who is a contributor to CNN. Michael? Please unmute yourself. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Michael, unfortunately, you are really broken. We can't hear anything. So maybe we will try to take one more question and come back to you, Michael. So let's see if we can have Shoko from NHK.
Hello, Tariq, can you hear me?
Hi, Shoko. Yes, please.
My question is not related to the special focus of today. Do you want to take other channels first, or may I continue with my question?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for taking my question. There is an emerging study that mixing different COVID-19 vaccines for first and second doses produces a stronger immune response to the virus. This study of Oxford shows 1 dose of AstraZeneca vaccine followed by Pfizer one was nearly as effective as 2 doses of Pfizer one. My question is, if you are in an environment where it's difficult to obtain the same type of vaccines for both doses, does WHO recommend to take 2 different types of vaccines? And if yes, maybe mix any of the any of the COVID-19 vaccines which are already registered in the emergency use listing, or do we need to wait until more studies to come, which combinations work and do not work? Thank you.
Thank you, Shoko. So I think Dr. Hombach would be a best place to answer this. Joachim, if you are there, please unmute yourself.
Yes, thanks very much. Thanks for that question. So, yeah, again, this is, I think, good news that we have obtained through this data, which again adds flexibility to countries if they face supply interruptions. So, and we have already in our position on the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine mentioned this, that the combination of AstraZeneca, and this is a vaccine where we had then in many countries have seen supply issues, followed by the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, results in very good immunogenicity data. So this is, I think it's very good. It's reassuring. Both directions have now been tested, and this is the study you are referring to. And there is obviously many more so-called mix and match studies that are ongoing. What I don't think we can do is to provide a generic recommendation that you can mix and match in any way you want. This is product specific, and it is important that these data are being generated. And so we have to see, but there is a lot of studies ongoing. Again, we have now the data for Pfizer and AstraZeneca with a spacing of about a month. More data would be coming, but it's a great addition to flexibility. Whether this is, so to say, a more general principle that can be applied is something to be determined. Over.
Thank you very much. Let's go to next question. We have Megan Rowling from Thomson Reuters Foundation. Megan?
Hi, hello. My question is about climate change and health with relation to the SIDS conference earlier this week. So the COVID pandemic has highlighted the linkages between climate change, health, and natural systems degradation, deforestation, and so on. And also now we're seeing heat waves hitting many parts of the world, which is also raising this issue up the agenda. So I'd like to know what WHO is planning to do that's new in terms of getting governments to respond on this and putting it on the agenda at COP26, and also Prime Minister Brown, if you have any particular demands from the small island developing states side, I'd be interested to hear that too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we should start with His Excellency Prime Minister. Prime Minister, would you like to address this question?
Sure. Thank you very much. I believe I made the point earlier in my statement that there should be some form of compulsory compensation by the large emitters to ensure that whenever countries, or let's say small island states, suffer the consequences of these storms and other climate events, they can include droughts, ocean acidification, and the general degradation of our biodiversity, that there should be some form of reparations for the damages to ensure that something is enshrined in law for the large emitters who obviously are creating the conditions for global warming and pollution, thereby undermining our natural diversity and causing loss of lives and damage to property. We believe that there should be some legal mechanism to obligate these states to provide compensation and also to provide funding so that we could adapt and mitigate to the effects of climate change. I'm also of the view too that there should be specialized instruments. So for example, there should be debt swaps in which we can literally have swaps for debt against climate investments. And also, I'm of the view too that there should be some program of debt write-offs for these countries that would have had to borrow repeatedly in order to repair the infrastructure as a result of these climate events. If we fail to make it obligatory, then we'll continue to have all of these, let's say, pledges, unfulfilled pledges of billions of dollars to be spent by these large emitters to assist with the adaptation and mitigation of against climate change. So I'm of the view that we now need to up the ante and to ensure that there's some form of legal obligation for compensation. And by so doing, I believe that countries will move faster towards achieving their Paris commitments, and obviously we take the necessary steps to transition into green energy, and obviously to save the planet and to ensure the continuity or sustainability of human civilization.
Many thanks, Your Excellency. And to address the first part of the question on WHO, we are joined here in the room by Dr. Naoko Yamamoto, our Assistant Director General for Universal Health Coverage, Healthier Populations. Dr. Yamamoto.
Thank you very much. Thank you. This question. As WHO, as the Prime Minister said that we are going to strengthen and accelerate our support to the CIS country, and also we will strengthen our communication and partnership with other partners, including financing partners like a Green Climate Fund and others. And also we will work with the CIS country to amplify their voices in it, and increase the visibility of the CIS countries at many international important political fora, including Food System Summit, COP26, and the Nutrition for Growth Summit, and so on. Also, we will follow up with the CIS countries leaders group about our efforts, and in the governing body of WHO, CIS country proposed to discuss at the governing body, and DG Tedros has already expressed his support to this. And also we agreed to set the next summit meeting in 2023. But when we talk about specific issues of COP26, as WHO, we work with the UK government and also our partners to stress the health issues, including CIS country at the COP26 this year in Glasgow. And we focus on the clean energy, clean cooking energy, as well as green health facility and so on. And we are going to amplify our CIS countries' voices and our efforts at this COP26 as well. Thank you.
Many thanks, Dr. Yamamoto. Now we will try to go back to Michael Bosyurkiv to see if we have a better line. Michael?
Hello, can you hear me okay now?
Now it's better.
Okay, great. So greetings from Kiev. I'm here today. Dr. Tedros mentioned the climate crisis. Recently in my home province of British Columbia, we saw that unprecedented heat wave resulted in hundreds of sudden deaths. And there was delayed and poor public messaging, few cooling centers, and other shortcomings. My question is the following: whether there's a feeling that elected leaders coming out of this pandemic are taking on board a Build Back Better approach, not only when it comes to handling future pandemics, but things like climate emergencies, absorbing lessons learned, instituting better public health messaging. And I'll just read you very quickly, sorry, Tarek, one quick line that I wrote. I said, perhaps it was naive to expect humanity to turn a global crisis into an opportunity. A virus, a pandemic, was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to unite against a common enemy, to embark on a process of building back better on contentious issues like fighting climate change. I'm wondering of your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So the question is about building back better. Maybe, Maria, you can start, and I think we should also hear from Prime Minister on this question.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks, Michael, for the question, and nice to hear your voice again. I mean, I think on the positive side, we are seeing some changes that are being made to be better prepared for the next one. I think we should not mince words. to suggest that there won't be a next one in terms of the next emerging pathogen or re-emerging pathogen, the next pandemic. But I would have to be honest and say it's not enough. We are seeing a lot of countries using the current situation that we are in with COVID-19 and the trauma that all of us are facing because of this virus, the upheaval that all of us in all of our lives have experienced. And not enough, I would say, is being done to build the fundamental systems that we need in public health, the surveillance systems that we need, the testing systems that we need, including the use of novel testing that is coming online, the antigen-based tests that are there, the new technologies that are being advanced. We need more investment in our health and care workers around the world to ensure that we have more people who are trained appropriately, who are provided the protection that they need to carry out the life-saving work that they do every single day, to support more community health workers who are the foundation of public health in so many countries around the world. There needs to be much more of that. I think we need to do much more in building trust with our communities and keeping that trust, working hard to keep the trust of our communities, building the leaders, engagement, much more engagement with community leaders, with religious leaders, with women, with youth, to be able to harness the energy and the innovation that we have for any of the challenges that we see going forward. And I think we need much more on the partnership side, the supply chains that were broken, that are being so hard, so many partners are working to rebuild, to be able to, once we do have supplies, to ship those supplies. And the partnerships that we have through R&D. I think the R&D side has been a real shining light in terms of this pandemic, but again, we need more. So I think the short answer is not enough, if I'm being honest, but I do want to be positive that it's not too late. My biggest worry that I have right now is that we don't use this current situation to make those changes. If we, quote unquote, wait until this pandemic is over, we won't do it. So we are seeing countries, and what we've learned from this COVID-19 pandemic is the countries that had experience with other infectious diseases across Asia and Africa, and diseases like MERS, like SARS, like avian influenza, Ebola, I could go on and on. They built those systems over decades. And preparedness is a constant. It is not a start and stop. It doesn't stutter. It's a constant. It needs constant investment in terms of energy, political will, financing. And the money is there. We see it. We see the money being raised for COVID-19. That is something that really, really needs to be invested in going forward. I'm sure others will want to talk about healthcare, access to healthcare, and climate, but we could probably spend the next hour on that answer. But I really want to emphasize it's not enough. So let's turn that around and really put that emphasis in, and all countries need to be doing this.
Thank you very much, Van Kerkhove. Maybe Prime Minister would like to add something on the issue of building back better and turning this pandemic into opportunities. Your Excellency?
Thank you very much, Excellency. Evidently, there was not sufficient effort in building resilient public health institutions prior to COVID. And I would say that one of the positive outcomes of COVID is that most countries are now focusing on building greater health resilience to scale up their institutions, ensure that they have the supporting health institutions and the equipment, the technology, and even the staffing to deal with future pandemics. In fact, it was predicted decades ago that we would have been faced with a pandemic at some point, but evidently the issue did not get a lot of traction globally. So COVID-19 has now forced us to address the issue of health resilience within our respective states. And you recognize too that when this pandemic, or when this virus first surfaced, many global leaders were not taking it seriously. But again, the devastation to lives and livelihoods would have forced all of us as leaders globally to address the issue and also to build out our health infrastructure to ensure that we're better prepared for the next pandemic. And we know too that one of the consequences of climate change is the fact that more pathogens will be released, and the likelihood of having future pandemics within a shorter period of time, maybe every several years, every decade, is likely. And that is one of the reasons to why we have to prioritize the issue of climate change in order to protect the planet and at the same time, even to control or to reduce or eliminate, for that matter, the pandemics that may follow in the future. But perhaps the most significant lesson as a result of this pandemic is the need for global collaboration and recognizing to the extent of our vulnerability, that we are as vulnerable as the weakest link. So, those are positive areas of development for future strong global collaboration to deal with these pandemics in the future. And obviously to prioritize research and development and to make the necessary resources available. And we'd have seen, for example, that in the development of the COVID vaccines, that wealthy countries in particular would have allocated an enormous amount of resources in order to bring safe and efficacious vaccines to market within the shortest period of time. So again, I think that there have been some good lessons, and as we realign and certainly adjust, I'm quite sure that we'll be better prepared to fight future pandemics and perhaps reduce the extent of the economic and social damage that we'll have experienced from COVID-19.
Many thanks, Your Excellency. Dr. Tedros?
Yeah, just wanted to add, while agreeing with what Prime Minister said, the virus is a common enemy, and that's why we have to fight it in unison. And this virus, this pandemic, has also shown us the centrality of health. And that's why investment in health will be very important. And then if you take climate change, it's the same. It's a common problem that affects the whole world. But it also disproportionately affects the island countries, small islands especially, more than any part of the world, although it's a problem for the whole world. When you see it in terms of islands, there are some projections, some islands may submerge. It's a matter of survival. But even if we say the projections are right and some countries could submerge, could be below sea, but it's only a matter of time until climate change affects others who are not an island, which is big countries or mainland. So it's a common problem. And when I come back to the question from Michael, the political commitment, I think, is necessary. But this is a matter of survival for the world. And if that cannot trigger political commitment, if the real and clear danger cannot provoke or bring political commitment, I cannot understand what else can bring commitment. And we have seen, by the way, during this pandemic, many countries were reporting that their ecology or their environment actually improving because of less interference and probably less pollution and so on. So it's a common problem. It's a matter of survival for the whole world. It's not the problem of the small island countries only. So that means it's everybody's problem, it's everybody's, and the solution is everybody's solution. And having a real commitment will be very, very important from all leaders.
Many thanks, Dr. Tedros, and thanks to Prime Minister and Dr. Van Kerkhove for addressing this question. We will now go to Avijit Majumdar from AMN in India.
Hi, thank you for taking my questions. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. So my question is, you see, the virus is mutating, and you have the Delta variant at the moment. So the question is, how long will this virus go on mutating? How far do we see this coronavirus affecting our world? What is the period that we see at the moment? Do we see for a longer period? We are up against a very a long time for this pandemic?
So thanks very much for the question. It's a big one. We definitely don't have a crystal ball to see how long this will last, but the virus is evolving. The virus has been evolving since it first emerged. This is what viruses do. So the variants of concern that we are tracking, there are 4 currently, the alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. And it's continuing to evolve. There will be more mutations. There will be more variants that will be detected. And some of those will be variants of concern. There are sublineages of the Delta variant that we're tracking as well. So the trajectory of this in each country is up to the plans that are in place and the ability to implement those plans. This comprehensive approach of surveillance, testing, early clinical care, isolation of cases, supported quarantine of contacts, the individual levels all of us can do with avoiding crowded spaces, knowing what our risk is every day and taking steps to lower our risk, wearing a mask, hand hygiene, physical distancing, etc., spending more time outdoors than indoors, improving ventilation, and vaccination. All of these factors are part of the equation of when this pandemic will end. The goals that WHO have set, the strategic preparedness response plan that WHO has outlined, sets the course for ending the acute phase of the pandemic. There are many factors of this pandemic that we will need to deal with for many years, addressing the inequalities that existed before this pandemic and are exacerbated during this pandemic. But the trajectory and the outcome of this depends on our actions. So the DG has laid out the goals of the vaccination coverage that need to be met by the end of September, by the end of the year, by this time next year. There is production that exists. There are vaccines that are available. There are more vaccines that are being studied in phase 2, phase 3 trials. There's tech transfer. There's a lot of positive things that are happening. We just need much more to be done to be able to get the vaccines to those who are most at risk in all countries, and then to be distributed even further once production continues to increase. But in the meantime, we still have the public health and social measures that work against these variants, including the Delta variant that is circulating in a number of countries around the world. So it's up to us in terms of what we do and how quickly we can end this pandemic.
Thank you, Dr. Van Kerkhove. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So let's go to Geneva-based Reuters correspondent Stephanie Nebehay. Stephanie, you have the floor.
Thank you, Tarek. Thanks very much. I wondered, I don't know who would be the right person to address this. Mike usually does, but I'm not sure he's there today. Given that WHO is advising the IOC and the Tokyo Organizing Committee, what lessons are you drawing from what's happened in Europe during the Euro 2020 soccer tournament, which WHO regional office has said has driven up new cases by 10% or so in the last week because of the mixing and so forth. So the question is, what sort of advice or what lessons are you drawing from that in advising the IOC and Tokyo Olympics organizers, please? Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Stephanie. It's also nice to hear your voice again. So as you know, Stephanie, we work with the IOC and other members and members who are handling sporting events around the world since the beginning of this pandemic, mass gathering events, to outline taking a risk-based approach and a risk assessment for each of the events that are happening, whether these are planned events or whether these are spontaneous events. And in doing so, having the plans in place. We've met several times with the IOC for the Olympic Games. But we do know that even small gatherings like backyard barbecues, if the virus is circulating and you don't take the proper precautions, the virus can spread. The IOC and others have outlined their plans in taking the approach for the Olympics, and we've been engaging with them and advising them on the best use of those plans. We are learning from Euro 2020. We are learning from many of the different events, whether these are religious-based events, whether there are events that are happening related to political rallies. If the virus is present and precautions are not in place, the virus will spread. So our European office has set up a dashboard looking at transmission around Europe and in tracking in our normal surveillance activities, looking at the circulation of this virus. I do just want to, we urge caution. We urge everyone to take caution in what they do. If you haven't been vaccinated or received the full doses of your vaccine, if you don't take the proper precautions, if the virus is circulating, you have an opportunity to become infected and pass that virus to someone else. So we urge everybody to take a risk-based approach in what they do, in the decisions that they make, the choices that they make, and the events that they attend have consequences, good and bad. So we will continue to track the spread and the circulation of the virus, continue to advise countries on the best use of the capacities that they have, taking into account all of the interventions that can be used to minimize the spread. The pandemic is not over, as we all know, and so it's really important that we continue every day to remain vigilant and do what we can to reduce the spread in our daily lives.
Thank you, Dr. Van Kerkhove. And we will take the last question for today's session. It's Ana Pinto from Folha de Sao Paulo from Brazil. Ana?
Hi, thanks, Derek. I have a question about the Lambda variant, the one who was identified in Peru, and I think it's now dominant in Peru, and I guess is in about 20 different countries. And I know it's a variant of interest. My question is, when does a variant become from a variant of interest in a variant of concern? I've read that there are some unusual mutations in this Lambda variant, and I'd like to know what's the state of play of, what do you know already about this variant, and if it's close to be considered a variant of concern. Thank you very much.
So thanks for this question. The Lambda variant, the C37, is a variant of interest that WHO is tracking at the global level. So the way that we discuss and characterize these variants, we work with a group of scientists around the world, our different networks. We bring in expertise with virology, with epidemiology, clinical management, people with bioinformatics, so that we can analyze and study the sequences that are shared through platforms like GISAID, and then we discuss the constellation of mutations, the combination of mutations that are identified. The Lambda variant currently is characterized as a variant of interest at the global level. It would become a variant of concern if it has demonstrated properties of increased transmissibility, if it has increased severity, for example, or if our countermeasures has some kind of impact on our countermeasures. And we look at the geographic distribution of the spread of these different variants. And so we characterize these through a combination of technical consultations that we have with our expert networks, using the information that we have on the variant, the specific mutations they have, any studies that are done in people, any studies that are done in the lab, and then we do this routinely, regularly. Our virus evolution working group meets every 2 weeks, but internally we have meetings through our epi teams, our lab teams, our regional teams. We meet with many of the different CDCs around the world, virtually of course, every week. To discuss. We work with our regional offices, so there's a lot of information and gathering of information. So it's a dynamic process. So if that is demonstrated to meet the characteristics of a variant of concern, we will of course classify it as a variant of concern. But I do think what you raise is important. It's about the process to understand, what is out there. We are limited in our ability to understand virus evolution because of sequencing that is happening around the world. The amount of genetic sequencing that is happening has increased substantially over time, and there are more than 2 million full genome sequences that have been shared on GISAID, for example. But we need better geographic representation of the viruses and the sequencing of those viruses around the world. We're working through our regional offices. We're working with many partners around the world to build that capacity and enhance that capacity, which will not only be beneficial for SARS-CoV-2, but will be beneficial for any future pathogen, future viruses, future pathogens that emerge. So this is a work in progress. And it, of course, also relates to the other question, deserves investment. And we're grateful for partners who are working with us to really invest in this really critical aspect of surveillance of these variants.
Just wanted to add to what Maria has said is another important issue that we are tracking is the effectiveness of vaccines against different variants that are circulating, particularly the variants of concern. As you heard, it's one of the criteria that are used to define a variant of concern is if that variant has a lower capacity for neutralization by antibodies, either after natural infection or after vaccines. The information on this is rather patchy, particularly for some of the vaccines that are being widely used. So we have a lot of information, for example, on the Pfizer-BioNTech and the AstraZeneca vaccines from many countries on effectiveness, on the prevention of not only severe disease, but also infection and transmission to contacts, but much less information on some of the other vaccines, which are also widely used. So WHO is really promoting the idea of well-designed and well-conducted vaccine effectiveness studies, and our regional offices are working with countries to try to promote that kind of data collection, both on the safety, but also on the effectiveness of vaccines, because this is going to be very helpful for us as we continuously examine data that's coming in and reassuring ourselves and the public that the vaccines that we're using are currently are still effective against these variants. And as of now, against the alpha, beta, gamma, and delta, we have some confidence that they are working and they're still preventing very high protective efficacy against severe disease. But we need to continue to watch that space as well. Thank you.
Many thanks to Dr. Van Kerkhove and Dr. Swaminathan for this important message on variants and vaccines. As we are coming to the end of our press briefing, I would like to invite His Excellency Prime Minister Gaston Brown to make some final comments. Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. And let me thank Dr. Tedros and the others at the WHO for giving SIDS this great platform to bring global awareness to the issues affecting SIDS, and obviously their own commitment to help us to achieve, let's say, a healthy and resilient future. And I also want to thank the members of the media in advance for helping us to, let's say, transmit this information globally so that global leaders will understand the challenges facing our countries, the vulnerabilities, and the need for international collaboration and cooperation in order to ensure that SIDS will enjoy a healthy and resilient future. Thank you once again. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this press conference. Thank you.
Many thanks, Your Excellency, for being with us today and sharing your thoughts on important issues that were raised this week at the summit. Before I hand over to Dr. Tedros for his final words, just to remind everyone that we will send audio file from this briefing tonight, and the transcript will be available tomorrow. For any additional questions, and to those journalists whose questions we were not able to take, please contact us at media@who.int and we will try to assist. Dr. Tedros.
Thank you, Tariq. I would like to start by thanking His Excellency Prime Minister Brown for joining us today and also for his leadership. I would also like to thank the media group who have joined today, and have a nice weekend to all. Bon weekend.